Welcome one, welcome all. Okay, so I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So welcome to our Hub Lab talk. This is obviously Andrei. We are delighted for him to be here, giving his talk on a broad presentation on qualitative and data science-driven, but quite surprising findings on online misinformation in Australia. That wasn't actually the title you wanted, was it? Misinformation from joyful mischief to violent extremists. Andrei is a rather distinguished. He's an associate professor leading the Behavioral Data Science Lab at the University of Technology, Sydney. His interdisciplinary research crosses computer and social sciences, blending psycholinguistics, digital communication, and stochastic modeling to understand human attentional dynamics in the online environment, the emergence of influence and opinion polarization. Andrei is the recipient of the prestigious Excellence Award and Academic of the Year at the 2023 Australian Defence Industry Awards and a finalist for the 2024 Eureka Prize for Outstanding Science in Safeguarding Australia. He currently leads grants worth 1.8 million from the Commonwealth of Australia to detect and model the spread of mis and disinformation and its weaponized counterparts, information and influence operations. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Andrei. Thank you.
So much. That's a big introduction.
Yeah.
And you never read it aloud until somebody reads it to you. All right. So thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for inviting me. This is a great opportunity to talk to you a bit about a little project, not little, about the project that I've been running for a couple of years now. So I'm quite interested in understanding misinformation, and the title that Piers was reading, it was just a description early on but note to self, be careful how you write that. What I want to do today, I want to take you through a deep dive into the Australian online misinformation environment. This talk is going to be quite qualitative for the typical talks that I'm used to giving, but bear with me. All right. So first of all, so who am I and what do I do? So in terms of how do I approach these problems, have you ever noticed flocks of birds in the sky? They have very complex patterns of behavior, and they are quite amazing. But did you know that these patterns of behavior actually stem from just 3 rules that are at the level of each individual bird? Each individual bird needs to, so the rules are separation. Each bird needs to keep a certain distance to its nearest neighbors. Alignment, they need to fly in the general direction of the local center of mass. And cohesion, they need to fly towards the center of mass, or align towards the center of mass. So why is this relevant? Because if you take these 3 little rules and you plug them into a simulator, you do get this kind of complex behavior. So the thinking here is, what if what we observe in today's online social media and in our digital society, what if we can take some of that? For example, what if some of the complex societal phenomena, such as opinion polarization, manipulation and propaganda, or even just things like popularity, virality, and the distribution of online attention, what if these collective level phenomena actually stem from rules that we all follow unconsciously at the level of the individual? Things like, what do we choose to reshare, for example, online? How do we find our peers? How do we consume information? Where do we get this information? And what shapes our values? So this is exactly what I'm concerned with, bridging the gap between these two. So to further a bit on my approach, assume that there are real unobserved human processes out there at play, and we can't see them, they are latent. However, what they do, they generate data. So as we do our activity online, we generate data, and this data has all the good stuff that we are aware of. It is imperfect, it is noisy, it is manipulatable and manipulated, possibly generated by generative AI these days. It is always biased and always very, very skewed. So it's got all these imperfections. However, that's what we observe from the processes. What my work does is build modeling that approximates the unobserved processes And then I'm using the imperfect data to fit this model. The advantage of using modeling as opposed to, for example, machine learning or AI-based systems is that we can understand these hidden phenomena and we can start building what-if exercises. So we can project into the future and we can start asking questions like, what if we could understand and model how humans behave online? What if we could train models that explain what we have seen? And most importantly, what if we could use these models to detect and predict, say, misinformation? So that's exactly it. My core expertise is linking what we do at the individual level to these observed societal phenomena. And I've been applying it for example, detecting online social bots in online social networks, looking at troll behavior and coordinated behavior, but also things like detection of racism, hate speech, just toxic content in general, and misinformation. And of course, none of that would be possible without the funding of some of our friends, mainly from the from the Commonwealth of Australia, so the likes of ESCG. And all right, what I'm going to be telling you today, that was like an overview. What I'm going to be telling you today are some of the findings of this very specific project, the Information Integrity Initiative, which was commissioned by the Australian government's Department of Home Affairs, and is done in collaboration with researchers from University of California in Berkeley. This project is now in its third year, and when it started, the mandate was very broad. They said, look, we just want you to look at the Australian misinformation environment. And the reason why they were interested and being quite vague is because most of the results that were out there actually come from the US. However, this is not US. The Australian online society has specificities that makes, for example, certain things that flow in the US do not catch here. Just think about stop the stealing the ballots in our last elections. It never caught up in Australia, but it ravaged the US electoral discussions. So these kind of differences can be explained, for example, by how our electoral system is functioning, but also AAC's, Australian Electoral Commission's preemptive measures. All right, so let me show you a couple of things that we've done in here, and I'm gonna structure this talk into 5 chapters. And in the first chapter, I'm gonna be looking at misinformation production. In the second chapter, I'm gonna be looking at misinformation consumption. Then I'm going to be painting you one of our proposals, the misinformation ecosystem, trying to put things into context. I'm going to be looking in the 4th chapter of possible interventions and the effectiveness of communication styling. And finally, I'm going to show you in depth the results of a theoretical modeling of how misinformation consumption can lead to radicalization, even extremist violent acts, and link it all together. All right. So now, this is a little story and even a bit of I'm gonna admit that we started this project with such a computer science hat on, and you read most computer science literature, and misinformation is considered to be the lack of fact-based information available to the consumers. And the somehow implicit assumption is that if you present the consumers with the correct information, they will somehow recognize the error of their ways and start thinking the right thing. That's what most papers out there do. So we did the same thing. We started from the same idea. So misinformation is the production of false information. So starting with this hat on, we started collecting via the Google News API, we started collecting all the news that were published in Australia it goes all the way to 2014, but we concentrate mainly in the 2020 up to 2023. And we got about 214,000 news articles produced by almost just shy of 10,000 news publishers. So we have this very large volume of news produced in Australia. So we set up to see what makes them. We set up to detect the misinformation and see what makes it tick. So one of the first measures that we've been looking at is called information completeness. So information completeness can be roughly explained as how many details a particular story has. So let's assume we have 2 stories. One is about Prigozhin challenging the Russian military. You may remember that a couple of years ago. and then let's say a more domestic story about fire blazing through an apartment complex. Each story is represented by multiple news publishers, and you have multiple stories about the same, multiple versions, multiple articles about the same story. You group the articles together, and then we start extracting details via a text clustering algorithm. So we have, let's say that the first story has about 10 details, and then the second story has also 10 details. Then we switch it around, and then we start measuring how many details are present in each of the articles. And let's say that the blue article up there has details 1, 4, 7, and 9. Therefore, we conclude that it has an information completeness of 40%. A second the article about the fire from the, let's say, has six details, therefore a completeness of 60%. And the last step is we group articles per their producer, and we average the completeness of each of their articles to get a producer level score. The assumption being then that we can split it per other features, for example, their political leaning, and voila, misinformation will stare at us. So how did we do? First, we started with political leaning. We took the well-known all sides media bias data set, which ranks news publishers worldwide into far left, center, right, and far right. To which we completed it with more slants for the lesser known publishers using one of our previously published. All right. So with this, we started plotting graphs like this. So you have information completeness on the y-axis, and then each of these box plots is a publisher. So for example, this is SDS, and all of their articles are within the box plot. And we start grouping the publishers, for example, based on their leaning. Left-leaning, center-leaning, right-leaning. This is one of the first graphics that we obtained in this project, and we stared at it. And then I told my colleagues and said, "Now this can't be right, because, well, there's nothing there, right? They're all the same." So we went back and we measured more things and more things. But what it turned out, every single time the result was the same. No matter how we split the publishers, the information completeness was always the same. What does that mean? It almost means that misinformation is not an information production problem, because there are no significant differences. And believe me, I show you one graphic. I could be spending the entire hour just showing you all the ways in which we failed, because we spent months on this. I just couldn't believe it, and we went back again and again and again. But always the result is the same. You can basically live on a diet of Sky News and still have a pretty decent coverage of what is happening out there in the world. All right, so it's not an information production per se problem. We can go back. But it's not per se information. It's not driven by the production. So if it's not driven by the production, then what do you do? Well, this takes me to the second chapter. So in parallel on other projects, we've been following two types of Australian misinformation groups. One was about far right, and the other one is about anti-vaccination. And these projects, they date back to 2019, 2020. And so we've been following these guys for a couple of years now. So we have a list of far-right tweeters, almost 1.5K Twitter users, and we also have Facebook pages and Facebook groups of anti-vaccination and far-right. We have quite a lot. We have almost 1.9 million external links from these individuals, and quite a lot of links towards news articles. So we said, okay, so if it's not a production problem, well, let's see if it might be a consumption issue. Look, at this point, we're almost desperate. I have to tell you, I was ready to throw everything at it to see what sticks. So what we also did, because there's such a large volume of articles, we started employing some of the qualitative tools out there. So some of you might have heard from Oblique, which is a text analysis tool. It is based on word counting. So again, nothing extremely high-tech generative AI, but it's being used quite successfully in a number of fields, including psycholinguistics. And it has 117 word categories, and they're split across these specific categories. Like, for example, you have summary categories, but then you have things not really readable here. You have affect, cognition, drives, social processes, and social preferences. The second one we've been using was the grievance dictionary. Very similar. It's a linguistic resource, but it's been mainly used in determining early extremist behavior. So this is for it's been mainly used for radicalization, and I'm going to show you in a second why this is relevant. So it contains also words in 22 psychological categories. And the third one we've been using is this novel tool called stylometrics, coming out of the NASK from Poland, NASK, their equivalent of CSIRO, which is a tool for creating textual embeddings for text that only concentrate on style and not the content. So that was a lot. This is a quick overview of grievance, but again, you can't really see anything here. And stylometrics, very similarly, trying to capture similar processes. All right. So then what we did, we took things bottom up, right? At this point, we were pretty scarred by our previous experience, so we took it slowly. So what I'm showing you here, I'm showing you some of these Luke features and the counting of these Luke features normalized, and I'm showing you 3 features: word per sentence, culture, and politics. These are 3 of the categories out there. And what I'm doing I'm counting each of the occurrences in each of the articles originating from moderate producers and far-right producers. And what you see here is the categories which are statistically significant. So there's not a huge difference. This is just an example. We've actually done it at scale. So when you plug all the categories out there and you create all the category pairs, between the moderate producers and the far-right producers, there are 4.5% of the pairs they are statistically significant. So it's not a lot of difference, but then I just told you earlier that was the case. However, that is when I'm looking at all the articles produced by moderate producers and far-right producers. But then if I switch my lens and I'm now looking at the articles which are shared by my far-right users, I get that. Not only do I get the biggest differences in here, but I get almost 70% of the pairs are different between the moderate producers and the far-right consumers. But also 14% of the pairs are significant between the producers of far-right and the consumers of far-right. In fact, this graph shouldn't even look like that. It should look like this. Essentially, what I'm showing you, and again, second shock for us, it seems that what the far-right consumers choose to consume is not very much aligned with what's being produced. But the conclusion here is they actually cherry pick whatever is already pre-aligned, is aligned with their pre-existing beliefs, and they just use from sources from anywhere. For example, if I'm showing you the Venn diagram of the intersection of the sources, you see that while 91% of the far-right produced articles are being shared by our consumers, also are 39% of the moderate articles shared by our far-right consumers. They don't discriminate. They share whatever they need in order to make their point. It is almost like information that you consume does not shape your ideology, but rather your ideology shapes what you're consuming and what you're leveraging to build a narrative of the world in which you are immersed. And that's my second conclusion here. Far-right users cherry pick the articles most useful for their arguments and align with their pre-existing beliefs. All right, cool. So that was, again, surprising. So in the third chapter, this brings me to the third chapter, which is the misinformation ecosystem. Now, while we were spending a lot of time immersed in these far-right consumer groups, we realized a couple of things. First of all, we realized that consumers tend to have patterns in which they acted. Almost like they were existing some personas of the typical consumer of misinformation. And I'm going to show you the personas in just a second. Second, there are always creators that cater to these customers. In fact, misinformation appears to be almost a product, which is being produced by the creators, sold to the consumers. But not only that, it is packaged. We also found that each of these personas had very strong preference in the sense of how this information is being given to them in terms of the style of the style of how it's written, the shape, and the format. For example, they might prefer an empowering style with a junk science shape put in a pseudo report. There are those categories. Furthermore, the reason why they're doing it is money. So this is a typical Breitbart. This is a typical Breitbart page. If you look at it, apart from the actual content, you see ads. Because I've accessed this Breitbart page from Australia, the ads are from Australia, and they are the ads for a genuine solar panel installation company and a genuine, lesser known e-shop. Where am I getting with this? Genuine ads, they fuel some of the misinformation. And on Facebook and Twitter, it's the same thing. So next to the fringe and radicalized content, you always have ads on the right to regular companies. So why does this happen? The attention of the misinformation consumers is a commodity. That commodity is transformed into monetary value via ads. Now, that's for the beginner misinformation creators, because the experts, they move to their own products. We were looking at the misinformation producer around anti-vaccination, and this lady started, like they all do, by monetizing attention. But then she stopped putting ads on her pages, and she started always making publicity to her own products, which were retreats, yoga retreats, wellness retreats by the ocean. Of course, she sort of shifted the target population, but this is not unheard. And again, the guy behind Breitbart did the same thing. He moved from, when he got demonetized, he moved to selling his own products, which are like muscle enhancing products. Andrew Tate, Manosphere, anyone? The guy sells education. He has the Real Alpha Male Academy, where you can subscribe and you get the entire content. And it's always like this. Selling ads is almost like you are selling the raw material or pulling it out of the ground and sending it to China to be smelted. Building your own product is smelting the iron onshore and selling the steel. It's a lot more lucrative. All right. So telling you, after I told you a little bit about the ecosystem, let me tell you about the different personas that we found. The first persona here is Jennifer. So before I go on, let me just quickly pause here. So we concentrated on two main topics: anti-vaccination and far right. So the personas I'm going to show you are specific to these contexts. If we would be to enlarge the topics, maybe there will be more. Second, I'm pretty sure everyone here knows what a persona is, but if you don't, it is a term coined not too long ago mainly in the field of marketing to understand your segment of consumers. It is a virtual person. So anything here, everything you see here on this slide is fictitious, is fiction. Everything is fiction. The name is fiction, even the image is fiction, is generated by Gen AI. But they are not, everything you see in here, including this blurb, which was generated by one of our qualitative scientists, is extracted. Of course, it's still fiction, but it's extracted out of the specificities of what she has saw in the groups that she was working with. So with that, our first persona here is Jennifer. She's a mother of two young children, no longer working, stay-at-home mom. And what we extracted also for each of the persona, we extracted a couple of things: the interest of what they care about, what they fear, and this is one of this is particularly important. I'm going to show you in the end. We believe that misinformation consumption actually starts from fears and confusion. I'm gonna come back to it. So their fears, I'm gonna tell you where the preferred style and the barrier to the generic communication, which would be the fact-based communication. So Jennifer is mainly interested in her children, creativity. Her fears are around the health and safety of her children, obviously, but also she starts fearing what every single young parent does. They fear isolation, because having a young family is so taxing in terms of time. Your friends forget about you. Believe me, I know all about that. And also the relationship with her husband, because her husband still works. The style that Jennifer prefers on her forums is an intimate style, together with junk science. And her problem with the fact-based communication is that it appears as quite masculine, formal and very masculine. Our second persona is Patrick. Patrick is a newly retired white male. Patrick is 67. He's usually high school educated. He has grandchildren. His main interests are, typical interests: humor, hard work, family. His fears are really the changes in the world, are about relationship with his family, also financial security. Everything is more expensive these days. But most importantly, Patrick is afraid that he's losing relevance for society. This typology of persona is quite relevant because it happens everywhere. If you remember 2 years ago, a bit more over than 2 years now, in South Queensland, 2 police officers were shot dead while responding a welfare check. There were 3 Patricks that killed them. They were subsequently sieged and killed, but it was a pretty big thing, right? That was a typical violent extremist act created via misinformation. Afterwards, inquiries have shown that those 3 individuals were deeply embedded into far-right and conspiratorial narratives. Those are the Patricks. So when Patrick receives the information, he prefers the expert style and conspiracy style, and his barrier to understanding generic communication, fact-based communication, is, funny enough, belief in his own expertise. So he believes he's an expert, but can't really consume the information that is being delivered. The third persona that we built is Aaron. Aaron, if we were in a US environment, Aaron would be called an incel. But we are not in a US environment, we're in Australia. Our incels are slightly older and slightly more educated. But their problems are, their interests are typical: strength, confidence, bodybuilding, a bit of religion, and obviously Aaron is a young male, so he's always interested in the opposite sex. His fears are professional failure, but also the main fear is an incel type fear. They fear that they will not be able to attract a partner, a girlfriend. The preferred style is empowerment, with speech. The problem with generic communication is authoritative tone. I spent a lot on these 3 personas, but that was mainly to give you an idea of how much time we actually spent immersed in this field, reading what these guys were writing. So where am I getting with this? The conclusion here is really, if I'm to take a marketing language, is know your customer. You need to understand who the misinformation is being addressed to, what topics, what is the preferred style, understanding quite intimately how messaging works. Why? Before I tell you why, what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at the creators of misinformation. So I talked to you in the, sorry, I'm jumping a bit up and down, but I'm going back here. So far, I told you about, I spent a lot of time talking about the personas here. I spent a bit of time talking about that. I didn't say anything about this because that's what we're currently doing right now. So my current project in this sub-project in this project is really looking at consumers. And more specifically, we are looking at toxic masculinity. We are looking at producers, not consumers, and we are looking at toxic masculinity, also known as manosphere. The most well-known exemplar is obviously Andrew Tate. And interestingly enough, their online messaging is very catchy to young boys, as young as 12, 13-year-olds. And it's filled with very, very traditional values about family, about gender stereotypes, how things should be done. It's interesting that the references to economics. They talk about the return on investment on a woman, the value of a woman, and it's also interesting that they are mixing toxic content with rather healthy advice around, for example, men's health, about going to the gym, exercising, drinking lots of water, and so on. There, Andrew Tate is being directly linked and accused by high school principals of misogynistic incidents in their schools. So these are big influences. You may have heard about the Bondi Junction stabbing incident not too long ago. We believe, in our team, believes that is a clear example of an incel type motivated violent act. And while the officials believe that it was not ideologically motivated, therefore it's not a terrorist act, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a heightened threat level based on online misinformation and online radicalization. So this is quite relevant. This is quite relevant. What can I tell you results in here? We're still working, but some cute, cool results, especially of the, not even of the press, they're not even in the press yet. Some of the results, for example, is that the comments of the consumers are they are a lot more extreme than the content that they produce. It's pretty interesting. These guys, they goad their audience all the way to some imaginary threshold that they don't cross, because they can get easily demonetized by the platforms, and they don't want that. But stop right here. However, their followers in the comments, they have no such boundaries. So what we find is that typically the comments are a lot more extreme. Cool. All right. So I told you about personas. I told you about writing styles. And because we kept seeing these styles coming over and over again, a quick question came. And the question was, can we do anything to improve the effectiveness of the messaging when we talk to these individuals? Can we effectively get to them? I need to pause here for a second and tell you that we believe that we perceive right now misinformation within our group, not necessarily as a spreading process. It's not the type of content that spreads on top of the networks, but rather it's a community. These people, they organize in thematic groups. They have meaningful social interactions in there. They have a relationship, they have power, they support each other. All the stuff that you would expect in a regular social environment. And that's where misinformation is mainly located. Moreover, these groups, they act as echo chambers. Yes, they talk to each other, but they also act as strong filter bubbles. And I know there's a lot of discussions around filter bubbles, but they truly act as filter bubbles because nothing that is not aligned with the ideology of the group doesn't flow inside. Add on top of it the fact that individuals consume most of their news from social media, therefore their groups. Add on top the recommender engine, obviously. And what you get is that these individuals, they are fully disconnected from reality, informational reality. So what we set up to do is, can we get to them? Is there any way that I can sort of burst into these bubbles? Can I put them in front of consensus-based information? And that's what we started doing. And the hypothesis was, what if I emulate the style that they expect to see things in? So what we did, we built Facebook ads. We actually did the field experiment. We bought ads from Facebook, and we used the Facebook's A/B testing facility. Facebook is great at anything ad related. They let you configure anything, interest, age, all the stuff that would never go through our ethical clearances. No problem, you can do it easily with the Facebook interface. And that's what we did. So we configured each of our personas within the Facebook fields, and we ran 2 parallel versions of the ads. They're identical. First of all, I'm telling who I am, the same stock image. If you click on any version of the ad, you land on a government-backed information webpage, so science-backed version of the narrative. The only difference between the two is the writing style of the textual fields. If you never built a Facebook experiment, a Facebook ad, you don't give them the ad, you build the different components, because this ad gets shown differently on the mobile, on the desktop, on the side of the page, on the bottom. All right, so we use what I just told you. We test our 3 personas, and we test also 4 styling of the message. One adapted for each of the persona, and the generic one that we call the government messaging, because it's so important. And 5 topics of interest: children vaccination, sexual education, 5G, climate change, and nutrition stuff. We measure success via the click-through rate metric. So the click-through rate is essentially the ratio between how many people saw the ad versus how many clicked on it, because I'm reminding you, we are trying to actually get to these individuals. Higher CTR, click-through rate, means better success. All right, so the first ad that you saw earlier was designed for Jennifer. So in here is the generic framing. On the right, we have the style framing. Facebook does a pretty good stuff. They shows it to about 10,000, just over 10,000 users. This one got 100 clicks. The other one had 121 clicks, with a CTR of 0.65% and 0.98% for this one. If you think these are low numbers, the best ads out there, they get the CTR of 2-3%. That's the typical the typical CTR that you get for professional ads. So we felt pretty good about it. But that basically leads me to an improvement of 51% just by tweaking the language. And we did the same thing with Patrick. So for Patrick, the improvement was even larger. It was 97%. And then because we liked what we saw, we actually went and we tested all of them. So I'm giving you in this table, the personas are, so I'm showing you in the table the messages based on the topic. So the topics are in rows and the different styling are on the column. Style for Jennifer, style for Patrick, style for Aaron. I can actually use style for Aaron and the neutral government style. So for example, if you want to know what we told Aaron when we talked about vaccines, so I go Aaron, vaccines, do childhood vaccines really improve natural human immunity? Because obviously Aaron cares more about these things. So what do we have the results? Now this is a big graphic. Let me unpack it for you. Each of these groups of 2 bars is an experiment. The darker shade is the neutral, the lighter shade is the styled version of the ad. The face is the persona to whom the ad was targeted, and you have the topic on the bottom. Cool. And on the blue side is when we matched the style with that of the persona that we were targeting. And you see the text here in boldface when we also match the topic. So for example, when we are targeting, this is the one you saw, Jennifer, vaccines, she cares about vaccines, targeted Jennifer, and we've seen a better effectiveness of the style version. The little stars is the significance level, strongly significant and just significant. So first things first, almost all results when we get the correct styling show a statistically significant higher effectiveness for the styled version of the message, except for Aaron. And I'm going to get back to Aaron. Aaron is a very interesting case. Aaron is more educated. He actually has critical thinking. He's just not deploying it where he should, but he has critical thinking. This doesn't work. This barely works, and this also barely works. So Aaron is the least influenceable by my style. On the contrary, Patrick is like fertile ground. He just responds. The reason for it, we believe, is that he has so much time on his hands because he's a newly retired person. Funny thing, even when we don't talk about the topics of interest, but interestingly enough, Jennifer doesn't really care about school education, and that's because her children are way too young. They're only 1 year old, not quite yet there. However, they still respond positively to the messaging, essentially saying, you just style it the way that you're expecting them to see it, and you're already getting better. Also, interestingly, we tested when the style is not correct. So this is, for example, we tested Patrick on school education with the style for Jennifer, for example. We see less statistical significance. For example, these two are not statistically significant, but we still see overall a higher effectiveness of the style messaging. This can be explained the following way. This is not just about the effectiveness of the style message, but also about the trustworthiness of the source. That's another element that I haven't touched yet. Essentially, when people think that a particular text is coming from the government, they will automatically stop reading and distrust it because it's the government. So I guess the take-home message here is just don't sound like the government when you're trying to talk to this individual, and you're already going to get quite far away. All right. So what I've been showing you here is that the correct styling significantly boosts message effectiveness, and this opens a lot of avenues, because from here on, we can start designing more. For example, we are looking at other features which are relevant in addition to the styling. And our next project will be really around even doing focus groups and surveys to understand what exactly, for example, consumers of toxic masculinity content appreciate about that content. Is it just the style? Is it the time? Is it the way that these individuals look, and so on and so forth? And it's a pathway towards how we can actually get to these individuals. Where this study actually falls short, this part, is I've showed you that I can get that message in front of eyeballs. What I don't know is what happened afterwards. Did they read it? Did they just click it and go and went like clickbait? I don't know what they did, right? But my purpose was to get to them. What is the next step? I don't know yet. However, even just getting to them is quite effective, as I'm going to show you in the next and final chapter. This 5th chapter is about the radicalization pathway. The story goes, as we were spending time in these forums, we realized that people seem to be on different scales of how engaged they were with this content, coming from the ones that were there just for the fun, all the way to the ones that were really, really involved in it. We came up with the idea of a radicalization pathway, believing that misinformation consumption is very similar, for example, to religious or political radicalization. And we built a pathway with 6 stages, starting from the least extreme to the most extreme. The way we built it is by studying ex-QAnon forums, so post-blue pill forums, where people discussed about their experience, told them how they got drawn into it, why they stayed, how they moved through the stages, and why they got out. So for each of the stage, we actually also identified effective interventions and natural off-ramps for how people got out. Okay, I'll just, what I'm going to do next, I'm going to take you through each of the stages, and I'm going to tell you how this is relevant. And evaluated. Yes, the final thing is we've actually mapped it against literature, against the literature of radicalization, and we actually found that our pathway is quite similar to the religious radicalization pathway. Another interesting bit is when you talk to police enforcing and government agencies, they only care about these guys. They care about the violent extremists. They care about the people with the guns or with the knives. The point we're making here, and this paper was the first to come out of the project. The point we're making in the paper is there is an entire ecosystem. It's a pathway that feeds these final individuals. I'm going to talk about this in the end after I'm telling you the different stages. All right. So the first stage is one of the most important ones. It starts always with 2 things, just like in radicalization literature, it starts with 2 things: grudge and confusion. So unhappiness and confusion. I told you about Jennifer. She is unhappy because her life has changed. Everything she knew was upside down, and she's confused about the effect of vaccines on her kids. Patrick just retired, and now he's unhappy about him losing prominence in society, and he's unhappy, for example, he's confused about education of his grandchildren. There's always these 2 components that are required to get people to look online to solve their confusion. As they go online, they realize they get in contact with the alternative view of the facts. So they get in contact with the misinformation, the fringe views, and then they start exploring those in this stage. Interventions are simply plain language and styled resources shared from trusted sources. That particular intervention that I showed you, where we just styled it in a way that they can relate to it, and then they get taken to a government website, that is enough at this stage. Just because they are looking for information, so I capture them with that bit, and they land onto the right information. Right. So if anything good came out of this project, in addition for me being here and talk to you about it, is the fact that I had at least 100 Jennifers that landed on the right information. Did I do anything? I don't know, but I sleep well at night. How do they get out? The off-ramp is usually receiving reassuring advice or the information from the trusted source. If they don't do that, in the next stage, they keep interacting with the alternative view, with the fringe communities. But also what they do, what really defines the second stage, is that they go back to the original sources of trustworthy, and they ask the questions. For example, Jennifer goes to the GP and says, "Look, doctor, I just read this stuff about vaccines causing autism. What do you think that is?" The worst reaction that the GP can do at that point is having a stigmatory reaction. If the GP goes, "Oh, you can't be that stupid, can you? That's what sends them straight back into the midst of their alternative community and straight to stage number 3. The intervention is quite interesting, is building resources to support the peers and the mentors. So the intervention is not necessarily at the consumers of the misinformation, but people who should be responsible at detecting that is at play, and actually how do you talk to these people? And look, I'm not pointing fingers at the GPs. They have a lot to do, and finding the signs of misinformation and dealing with it is not in their job description, right? But it is what works best. If they receive an empathetic response, a non-stigmatizing response, giving them the information, that can pull them off the off-ramp. If they don't, bam, they go back straight to the communities. They start self-censoring. They don't talk to family. They don't talk to their offline groups about this. And for a while, they have a parallel life where they have a normal life in their offline, and then they have their own online work, life in the fringe communities. At this point, interventions from the outside tend to not function anymore. What we observe is that most interventions actually came from de-radicalization spaces or just reducing time offline. Also, what works at this point is being talked out by former believers. That's what still works. If this doesn't, if they move to the next stage, we get to stage number 4, which is the first active stage. Up to here, in the first 3 stages, our individuals were lurkers. They were mainly participating in the communities, reading the material, being engaged in a passive way. From the 4th stage, they became active in these communities. They contribute their own interpretation, they share their resources, and from here on, really, interventions get increasingly limited, and the off-ramps, it's just around showing the illogical and shocks. What we also noticed, some of these individuals, they got out because they had a shock in their lives. They were diagnosed with cancer, a family member died. The next stage is stage 5. In stage 5, it's quite obvious that the person is involved in these, but not only that, it starts affecting their offline work, their real life. So they withdraw from their offline networks. They will disconnect from families. They will stop doing their hobbies. The interventions here really, as a family member, if you have a person like this, really at this point, there's not much you can do except be there. Try not to argue with them, just be there. Try to be that lifeline that still connects them to this reality. It's very similar to them disconnecting completely from who they were and just moving just with these groups. I know this firsthand. My dad is a 5, and I know he's alive because he sends me all these Russian propaganda messages on WhatsApp. And I know he's well when he sends them. If he doesn't send them for 3 days, then I call my mom and say, is he sick? Is he all right? And then he starts sending them again. I go, yes, he's okay. I was actually thinking about proposing to the SCG a project about forward detection of the Russian propaganda, because honestly, whatever he sends me in the morning will come out in the newspaper or in our own feeds that later that day or the next day. Honestly, he would be amazing for that. But on a personal level, is not fun. At this stage, these individuals they start putting up with mental health pressures. Their mental health actually declines quite a lot because they live in a paranoid environment, right? When you believe that the government is there to get you at every single step, it wears you down. There's a toll. And you can imagine the last stage is overt extremist acts. So these are people that actually take action to their hands. They buy machine guns, and when 2 police officers stop at their door to see if everyone is all right, because the government is there to get you. The interventions here are really quite limited. Admittance to either hospital or mental health institutions. But a couple of observations. Not everyone makes it to the last stage. It's actually quite few people that get to that stage. People can stop at any of these stages and stay there. Also, the speed you traverse the pathway can vary quite consistently. It can take years, or in the case of the individual, in the US individual, you may remember the guy that debarked in front of the pizza parlor in New York with Pizzagate with automatic machine gun to free the children. Took him 6 weeks from here to there, right? But what I'm trying to say is that that's short, right? It takes a lot longer than that. And also people can move up and down the stages. It's not one way. It's not a one-way highway. But as I was saying, police enforcement, they are really interested in this last stage because that's what they're trying to counter. But it's the entire pipeline that feeds that last stage. We need to make sure that we deploy interventions at every single stage in order to prevent people to get to that last stage. So in this last part, I showed you a theoretical model linking misinformation consumption and radicalization. And that is it for my presentation. Thank you so much. I did put a link here to the report we produced. It is, though, quite technical and long, and it's a bit old now. So some of the elements that I've been telling you about are not yet are not there. Question? Yes.
One of the things. On the far right or far left, so on election day, it was curious that Alan
It's not something I've studied, obviously, so I can't tell you in terms of the results that I built, but I can tell you I've been thinking about this. And so let's say in Europe, there's when you vote, you have the first level of voting where you decide if you go to vote or not. Not going to vote is a way of voting. You're voting against the political establishment, so you're not voting. But that means that the result is actually only taken by the ones that vote. So that's where you start seeing this spread towards the margins, and that's what we see in Europe everywhere, right? We see the far right gaining a lot of momentum. So taking this back, what I think that Australia is a very good place, simply because people need to show up and vote. Most of the people, they're not involved in what I told you here. So most people, they're not there. They're nowhere here. They're here. They're normal, well-functioning people. That's where 99% of the people are. And if you make these guys vote, they will go there and they'll vote one of the 2-3 big parties, and maybe they'll put as a second vote, legalized marijuana party. But just for joy. Otherwise, you still have I think it brings more robustness to the system. The fact the compulsory voting, it doesn't allow these extreme voices to be as loud in the context of the people that abstain from voting. And from there, I think what you're saying, it makes sense. It's still the big parties fighting for the big majority, the big chunks of these fringe elements. They stay on the fringe, whereas in Europe, they sort of become mainstream because most people don't vote. They don't care. They're disillusioned. I get quite often the question about the far left. The far left is a thing of the 90s, I think. I'm not sure if the far left is not such a big danger as the far right ideology. So I haven't really studied it. There's interesting that in the novel misinformation narratives, you have elements that are traditionally from the left and from the right starting to blend in. So I do talk about far right because it's kind of easier to sell, but when you look at, for example, Jennifer is not your typical far right sympathizer, right? She's progressive, she's open, but then you start seeing blended ideologies, and most importantly, you still see around anti-vaccination, right? Anti-vaccination, everyone not anti-vaccination, sorry, a lockdown. Everyone was out there. You had the left who were about. I don't know exactly why the left was there. Sorry, I'll need to go back. But the right was there for the rights. But they're all protesting against it. So this hard division between the two is not very clear anymore. I mentioned a lot about how when you see spaces, it raises a lot of red flags to me. I've seen like obsessive compulsive type thought. They have this pattern of like getting reassurance about the world space where the answers are quite defined. Not that like these spaces, I feel like some people argue that the ideologies tend to be very like simplified versions of the world. And I sort of push back against that because sometimes things like, you know, incel ideologies, they have these really complex systems for how relationships are supposed to work. But what they are is they're predictable. And I wonder how much you think that being a factor here is people not necessarily wanting these things to be like reassuring themselves a very certain version of the world. Can't fully comment on the core of your question because I haven't attacked it that way, but I'm going to give you one example which is close by and might answer partly. Even the reasons why they get sucked into this are not always obvious. We were looking at this one example, this one lady who was crucial for organizing anti-lockdown online organization. She was active. She was everywhere. She was pushing this messaging. But then as we gather more information about her, there was one thing that started emerging. The reason why she was doing it was not that she was motivated by it necessarily. She had a condition that was solvable by elective surgery. Elective surgery was stopped during COVID times. So for her, she was in pain, and her pain was predictable solvable by surgery that she could not get anymore. So she was not railing against necessarily the lockdown. She was railing against her not being able to get her surgery. And these reasons, if you look really deeply to these individuals, one by one cases, there is always some sort of other reason that pushes it. And I was talking to some of my funders and some of my collaborators. I was like, you want to shut her up? You can do two things. You deplatform her / digitally whacking her, just give her surgery and she'll shut up because you're solving her core issue. I feel that something similar can be applied to your question. People come into these spaces because they have unfulfilled needs. They may have pre-existing mental health issues. They may have a predispositions for being always. I don't know. I wouldn't be able to answer without looking closer at the data, but I feel that there's something which is always pre-existing. We come into these and we adopt these narratives, but it's based on something else deeper. But then I'm not a psychologist here. I feel a bit out of my realm here. I feel more comfortable explaining to you a modeling procedure or some stochastic process than this.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.